If you're someone who struggles with social anxiety and you're desperate to do something about it, chances are you've already turned to one of the AI models like ChatGPT or Claude for help. As someone who struggles too, I want to say that I understand exactly why you would do that, but the very reason you would do it is the reason it will never work. And I want to also share with you something that actually will. My name's Dave Cottrell. I'm a lived experience mental health educator, and one of the things I actually help other people with is overcoming social anxiety. I did this from first learning how to overcome mine. So I totally understand why you would turn to something like Claude to help you with this. If you have social anxiety, one of the key problems with it is you don't feel comfortable interacting with other people. And as time has gone by, the barrier to entry has been lowered and lowered and lowered to the point at which you can now speak to a non-judgmental chatbot that will tell you a combination of what you need to hear and what you want to hear, and it will do it all without triggering any of those anxiety responses. It sounds perfect, right? But within its perfection lies the problem. See, the way that anxiety works is what's called a positive reinforcement loop. That means that each section of anxiety positively reinforces the next. It doesn't feel positive when it's happening. But what happens is we have anxious thoughts, which lead to anxious feelings, which lead to anxious actions, and they lead round to more anxious thoughts. Everything we do when we choose to avoid a situation that could potentially be triggering is an anxious action. And although it doesn't lead to anxious thoughts straight away, in fact, most commonly it leads to relief in that moment, it does lead to them later on. This is something that I call a boomerang behavior, something that gives you something up front and takes away later on. I've done it myself where I've turned down a social interaction, and the first thing that happens is I breathe a giant sigh of relief. But this does lead round to more anxious thoughts. After the initial relief fades, I'm stuck back with that same anxiety in my head, saying things like, oh, you avoided that. People aren't going to invite you to things anymore. Oh, everyone probably thinks you're weird for not going. The anxiety in my head has not gone away. It may have stayed quiet for 10 to 15 minutes, but it's back, and now it's got a whole lot of new material. This process continues, and with each action of avoidance, we allow our comfort zone to shrink and our anxiety to grow. So where does Claude or ChatGPT fit into this? Well, here's the thing. We will avoid the thing that is currently too uncomfortable for us. And when we avoid that, eventually the next thing becomes too uncomfortable for us. So I will use myself as an example here. When my social anxiety first really kicked off, the first thing that I actually started to do was I would get my friends to phone for pizzas for me. I would offer to buy my friends a pizza if they would phone for it and go and collect it. It seems like a straightforward trade of money for service, right? But there's something a lot more sinister in it than that. See, before this, if my friends weren't there and I needed to order a pizza, I would order the pizza myself. But after this had happened a few more times, I suddenly found myself so anxious about making that phone call that I just couldn't do it. And this is before you could order online. Various advances in technology would allow me to slip even further into this. When I would go to the petrol station, if pay at the pump was an option, I would be taking it every time, just so I didn't have to have the interaction with the person inside. Once again, at first, if it wasn't an option, I'd still get the petrol I needed. However, eventually it became something that I would drive specifically to a particular petrol station or gas station for my American audience, and choose that one simply because it meant that I didn't have to interact with a person. And then once self-service checkout started coming at the supermarket, I would use them again so I could just avoid that small talk that could potentially happen at the till. Now, all of these things gave me comfort in the short term, but what happened is my anxiety grew and my comfort zone shrunk. And it got to the point where a few years back, I was sat in the car park outside of the local Tesco, unable to go in. I still had the scan as your shop option. I didn't even have to interact with a person at the checkout, but I didn't even want to be in the same building as people. And that's when it becomes a really big problem. Now imagine this downward trend when it comes to social interactions with a therapist. If a face-to-face therapist was the only option that you had to discuss your social anxiety, yeah, there's a lot of people out there that would not take that option. But there's also people that are sat on the fence about it, that not the ones that are ready to just go, but the ones that are on the cusp. And because it's the only option, that's what they choose. As we lower the barrier to entry, we feel like we are serving more of the people that wouldn't enter into regular therapy. And to a degree we are. However, what does happen is those people in the middle go towards the easier, more accessible and more comfortable option. So this might mean that you are only just ready to speak to an actual therapist physically face to face, but because it's available, you choose an online setting. This keeps filtering down. You go from an online setting to anonymous support group. You go from an anonymous support group to a forum where you're not even a visible member. You go from that to speaking to an AI. And the problem in all of this is the fact that the social anxiety that you're trying to overcome requires you to go in the opposite direction. Now, a good support group would push you to move into an online therapy session. A good online therapist would push you into going to a physical face-to-face therapist. A good physical therapist would push you into going into social settings. But ChatGPT, Claude, they're just going to keep you there being comfortable and being okay with them being your best friend. You are practicing your social skills with something that's not even social. So if you are utilizing an AI model as a way just to get started, to build you up into speaking to an anonymous support group or speaking to an online therapist, that's fantastic. But it's going to be on you to tell it that. Set that out as your goal when you're having the conversation. Put it into your prompts. Ask questions like, what steps do I need to take to make it more comfortable and accessible for me to move up to face-to-face therapy? But let's face it, the fact that it's not a real person, it's not judgmental, isn't the only thing that makes it more accessible. It's the fact that it's free, or mostly free. Therapy is not cheap. It is absolutely worthwhile, but it is not cheap. So that's why I want to share with you the exact model that I used to break out of my social anxiety and the same model that I talk my friends, family and clients through. No paywall, no follow and subscribe for the next video for the third part so that you actually keep up. The whole model right here, right now. And the best thing is it's remarkably simple. Now, simple, not necessarily easy. And it is literally only 2 steps. What we want to do is we want to take that positive reinforcement cycle and we want to turn it to our advantage. We want to start engaging in more positive, less anxious actions and allowing those actions to feed the loop. Because it can become a state where positive actions lead to positive thoughts, lead to positive feelings, which lead to more positive actions. We can make this cycle work for us. This process is commonly referred to as exposure therapy, and in the therapeutical setting, you will do part 1 and the therapist will handle most of part 2. Today, I'm going to teach you how to do both parts for yourself. The first step is to take an action just outside of your comfort zone and accept the fact that it's going to be scary. If it is scary, that is not a fault in you. That is the fact that you have let the anxiety rule the roost for far too long, and right now, it doesn't want you to overcome it. It wants to stay being anxious, but you don't. So you are going to feel a bit of resistance. And if you're not feeling any resistance, you're probably not picking something that's outside of your comfort zone. If it feels challenging, it's supposed to, because it's a challenge. For me, this meant something that to many people seems completely trivial as someone who publicly speaks for a job. I had to make small talk with someone in public, not in a work setting. Now, I do not exaggerate when I say that I was absolutely terrified when this setting came up. I was at a Breathwork event, an event where most people are actually there for self-development, so would get it. So I actually set the barrier to entry pretty low. But still, I was absolutely terrified, and I sat there on my yoga mat, wanting desperately to turn to the person next to me and introduce myself. And it took me about 15 to 20 minutes to pluck up the courage just to say, "Hi, my name's Dave, how are you?" And that is all I had to do. But here is the most important thing that leads into step 2. We do not want to treat it as something that is trivial, even if it seems basic, even if it seems like something that everybody else just takes in their stride. We want to treat it with respect, and we want to treat ourselves with respect when we achieve it. Because here's the thing, if your brain is trying desperately to get you not to do that thing and you do it anyway, that's not a baby step. That's a giant leap. So step 1 is take the action. Step 2 is big yourself up. I cannot stress enough the importance of this. If you put yourself down in that moment, if you say, oh, so what? All I did was say hi to someone on a yoga mat next to me. So what? Big deal. How pathetic am I that? That's a big deal to me. That's going to stop you from moving forward. That's going to keep you in your anxiety. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that's not you talking. That's your anxiety clinging on and trying to survive. And like I said earlier, in a therapeutic setting, that second step is often handled by the therapist. Now, imagine you were in a situation where you were paying 60, 80, £100 an hour to a therapist. You told them, I did what you asked me to do. I got outside my comfort zone and I actually pushed myself. And they turned around to you and said, so what? It's not that big a deal. I'd like to think that you'd fire that person straight away and never speak to them ever again. So that's why it's so important that we don't talk to ourselves like that. That therapist would big you up in that moment. Any good therapist worth their salt would not only be proud of you, but would show you that you need to be proud of yourself. Because ultimately that feeling there is what really makes it stick. That feeling there is the difference between you going back inside your shell and you feeling brave enough to slowly step out of it. Once you have done those 2 steps, it is just a case of repeating them. You find the next thing that is a little bit more scary. You do it. You big yourself up. You find the next thing, you do it, you big yourself up. And the key thing here, especially for people that want to rush the process, is choosing the next big thing, because how big we make that next choice might bring up the potential reward, but it also brings up the potential risk. And that's worth being aware of. Because if you're able to go for something absolutely huge and you get it and you big yourself up, your comfort zone is going to grow so fast you wouldn't believe it. But a safer and more dependable option is to take the smaller risk with the smaller reward and let that compound over time. Because unfortunately, with the bigger steps, if you do fail, it might push you further inside that comfort zone again. And it might be a while before you feel brave enough to take this challenge once more. So there you have it, the very process in its entirety, as promised, that I use for both myself and others. I would love to know if you give this a go and how it works out for you.